Hey guys, Eddie here. I wanted to do a video today of an example from a client that just called me earlier today who had a situation where she has a ton of data from her website where she's exported the data and it's given her two spreadsheets. The first sheet is a list of the client IDs and the client names, so unique records. And then the second sheet is, the client ID and all of the items that each person has offered. So, multiple records per ID potentially. And I built a solution for her using Excel VBA and predominantly the find method. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, oh, yeah, I should have just used a SQL call because you can use ADO, ActiveX database objects, and SQL along with inner joins across sheets to accomplish the same thing very quickly, much quicker than the find method. And so I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I've already staged the solution in Excel, so I'll open up a new instance of Excel. This is actually a nice little feature with Excel. If I were to click Excel right now, it would launch what is seemingly another instance of Excel, but it's not. What we're going to do is we're going to launch a new instance. I'm going to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, hit Excel, and it should ask me if I want to start a new instance, and I do. Okay, great. So we'll create a new blank workbook here. And so the data kind of looked like this for my client. She had two sheets. First one was client. And so we had client ID, and we'll just have unique records here. And then she had tons of columns, but we'll just add one column. We'll just say name. So we'll put in my name, and Mary, Joe, John. Okay, so this is the list of her clients. And then she had a second sheet, which we will call items. And so here we'll say, client ID again because it was linked, and item. So for client number one, let's say they ordered a vacuum cleaner. And client number two ordered a mop. Then client number one ordered a can of jelly. Then client number three ordered a computer. Then client number three also ordered lens wipes for the computers. Then client four ordered towels. And let's say client five didn't order anything. So as you can see, we've got in this instance, client one has two items they've ordered over time. Client two has one, client three has two, and client four has one, and client five has nothing. So what she wanted to do was take the results of the combination of these two records and put them into a third sheet. And so we'll do that here. We'll say, call this results. And we'll say we want the client ID and just the item they ordered. And we'll take the results of that and pop it in here. So to build the solution in VBA, right, we're going to go into Visual Basic. What I typically like to do is when I build a VBA project, I like to properly name all of my objects. So I would rename the VBA project object to VBA SQL or VB SQL, and then I'd give all my sheet objects their proper name, like sheet client and sheet items and sheet results. And then I even like to rename this workbook because you can still use this workbook object even if you rename this object. So we'll just call this workbook SQL. And so I can refer to, workbook SQL, or I can still use this workbook. So it's kind of a good practice to rename that just because it's proper standards, and you can use both objects. So good habit to get into. Now, because we're going to use SQL, we need to save this workbook. So let's just save it now. We'll save it with macro enabled, and I'll just call this SQL example, SQL EX, and we'll save it. Okay, we're going to create a module, and just call this mod SQL, and we'll call this, we'll make a public sub, and we'll combine. So one of the first things we need to do is create a reference or a late bound instance of the ADO object. Again, that's the ActiveX database object. Super powerful. You know, you can use it to talk to databases, Oracle and SQL Server and MySQL and Access and text files, and even on the web you can use it in like a stream reader type of thing. And you can also use it within Excel, which is super powerful. And what's nice about it is you can use those SQL calls even when Excel is closed. So I often will inherit projects from other people, and let's say they have to iterate through like hundreds of Excel workbooks. What I'll typically find is something like this for each workbook in, and then they'll iterate through a directory, and then they'll use like the workbook opens command, and then do the work on the workbook here. So whatever the code is that they need to, the data they need to extrapolate out. And that's super slow because opening up the workbook takes a long time. Even small workbooks, can take a long time to open up. When you use SQL, you can actually do you can do calls against workbooks that are closed. So it's a lot quicker. I wish Microsoft would incorporate that SQL functionality into Visio, because I'm doing a Visio project right now, and it would just be super just powerful for me. But from the little research I've done, I haven't seen it, so I'm forced to kind of still use that kind of methodology where I open Visio workbooks, find the objects I need, and then iterate through them, as opposed to just doing a SQL statement across all the objects. So all right, so let's create our instance to our ADO object. I have already staged the code, so we'll just copy over some of the key parts, and then we'll walk through the rest. So this is pretty standard stuff when you're going to create a connection to an internal workbook. This is the provider. It should already be installed. It's standard, and we're just saying, hey, the connection string is going to happen on this workbook. And this just tells it I think the minimum version of Excel, and then whether or not you're going to have headers. And we are going to use the headers. All right, so what we want to do at this point is we want to create our SQL call. So let's see what our SQL call looks like. Again, I've staged it, but we'll walk through it. So we'll say SQL equals, and then we'll figure out how we're going to structure it. So what we want to do is we want to select, let's say, everything from. So now when you're calling against the Excel workbook with SQL, you typically put the sheet name in brackets. I think you can avoid it if the sheet name doesn't have any spaces, but I've been doing this for so long, I forget if that's the case. We could test, but I'm so used to using brackets that it's just second nature by now. So you're actually going to use the sheet name and not the object name. So if you're in VBA and you want to reference the object, like the client sheet, we would say sheet client, and then we get all the members, the methods and the properties and events and all that stuff too. But when we use it within SQL, you have to do the sheet name. So now, I guess the right way to do this, just assuming that the front end sheet name could change unless you lock it down, would be to do something like this. Use the sheet object, so like sheet client dot name, or we could just hard code it. And let's just hard code it just because this is just an example, but if you are going to do this the correct way, this is probably better than hard coding. It's definitely better than hard coding. So we're going to say client. So let's just do a quick test to make sure this works. Create a record set object here. cm.execute SQL, and then we'll just take a look at that just to see how it looks. Get string is pretty powerful. I like that ADO call. So you can see we get all the records from client. And we could do the same thing on items. And always have to follow it with the $sign. And there we go. There's all the items. And now we want to combine them. So let's say select everything from client. Now we're going to do a left join on items. So on basically the client ID. So we're going to say on client ID. So, extremely powerful, and, you can do most complex SQL commands. I'm not sure where the limits come in. I don't know if you can do like habbing or super aggregate functions, but it's for stuff like this across sheets, it's completely relational, so very powerful. So we'll say we want to match on client ID over here. Oops. And I've run into instances where, there is no header and you have to determine the name of the field. And that's pretty easy because what you can do is you can just stop the code execution and interrogate the field name. And typically it's like field 1, something of that nature. I'll give you an example right now. So let's say we'll go back to our original example here. And let's say we did not know what the header name was for client ID. So we'd step through, I'm hitting F8. We're going to skip this line. We're going to execute. And then let's say we need to interrogate. We can just go into the immediate window and say, give us the first field. So it's 1. And then give us the name of it. And we'll get client ID here. But if there was no header, we'd probably say field 1. But that's one way to find out the name of the field that you're looking to reference. So we don't need that anymore. So we'll just comment that out. And this should give us a combination of all of the records. So we'll just run this and see what it looks like. And there we go. So now all right, so we've got, some duplicates here, and I'll show you how to, parse those out in the SQL command. And, we might or might not want to know the client record John, because John did not order anything. So we might want to exclude him. So we could do a right join, I believe. That should exclude him. And yeah, there we go. So right join excludes John, who didn't order anything, and left join would include him. And that's pretty simple. If you know SQL, it's just the include everything either on the left or the right, depending on the join. So we'll leave it as a right join. We'll just exclude. We'll just exclude John's record because he didn't order anything. So very powerful commands in ADO is the copy from record set command. And I don't have IntelliSense, you'll notice. So when I hit the dot, no IntelliSense, and that's because we used a late bound object. So we used just create object. If I were to go into tools references and choose the ADO library, then we'd be fine. But since I know the method that we're using, copy from record set. And then the parameter here is where you're going to put the data. We want to put the data in results. So we'll say sheet results dot range A1. And we'll execute this again. Yep. What happened? Hit F8 again, see what happened. Object doesn't support this property or method. Let me just take it to Google like I always do. And I'll just put in ADO, copy from record set. Maybe I got the parameter wrong. Oh yeah, it's a range object. It's not in the record set. It's part of the range object. So within where we want to paste our data, we'll say A2 because I don't think it pastes headers. And there we go, copy from record set. That's what I wanted. And then we're going to paste in our record set. Now I'll hit F5 to continue on. Okay, I think that probably is empty because it went to the end of the string. We'll try that one more time. There we go. All right, so now when we look at the results, we should see all of our items, and there they are. So what we're going to do is we want to take out this third column. We don't need to duplicate the client ID, so I'll show you guys how to do that. So we'll delete our record set. And right, so instead of just saying we want everything, which is basically just iterating over all the columns on item and client sheets, we're going to tell it we want the client ID, and then we want the client name. So we'll just copy this and change this to name. And then we don't want the client ID from the item sheet. We just want the actual item that was ordered. So it should be that. Now when we run this again, we should skip that third column. All right, so I probably got this name wrong. So let's just double check. Oh, it's items. Okay. So I got the sheet name wrong. So we'll execute this again. I'm hitting F5 on the keyboard. There we go. It executed, no errors. So we should see in our results. There we go. The only other thing we need to do is to add in the headings, and I'll show you how to do that right now in a programmatic fashion. So we'll take this out again. We'll delete the data. And then, we'll just do it the right way. So we'll just iterate through the headers. So we'll just say for I equals 0 to 3, 0 to 2, because we know there's 3 records that we want to return. And we'll say sheet results, range A1, and we're going to offset only by columns up to I. And the value we're going to put in is RSI name. So that gives us the field name. And so that should give us the headers in row 1. So I'll hit F5 again. There we go. We should see it. And there we go. And this is a lot quicker and easier to use than the find method. Find is very powerful, and you can do some real crazy powerful stuff with it, like a multi-find type feature. But SQL is definitely the way to go if you're looking for vast amounts of data, and especially across multiple sheets.